We often look to the past to understand ourselves. Tonight, we turn our attention to the year 1872 and the solemn story of George Colvocoresses. It's a case that reminds us that behind historical records are real people, whose lives were irrevocably changed by the events that transpired. This is their story, as best as it can be told. Captain George Colvocoresses was a man whose life read like an adventure novel. Born on the Greek island of Chios, he was orphaned as a boy during the brutal 1822 massacre by the Ottoman Empire. Rescued and brought to America, he was adopted by Alden Partridge, the founder of the military academy that would later become Norwich University. He entered the United States Navy and embarked on a distinguished career that took him across the globe. He served as a midshipman on the famed U.S. exploring expedition, charting vast swaths of the Pacific and Antarctica. During the American Civil War, his command of the USS Saratoga was marked by valor, leading to the capture of several Confederate vessels. By 1867, he had retired with the rank of captain, settling into a quieter life with his family in the picturesque town of Litchfield, Connecticut. He was a respected war hero, a man of standing, and a symbol of the American dream. His dramatic life, however, was destined to have an equally dramatic and deeply mysterious end. The 3rd of June, 1872, began as an ordinary day for the retired captain. George Colvocoresses, now 66 years old, left his comfortable home in Litchfield for a business trip to the bustling port city of Bridgeport, Connecticut. His journey was a routine one, undertaken to meet with his lawyer and conduct other financial affairs in the city. He arrived in Bridgeport and spent the day attending to his appointments. Friends who met with him that day described his demeanor as normal, giving no indication of any underlying distress. His business concluded, Captain Colvocoresses planned to travel onward to New York City. His intended mode of transport was the overnight ferry, a common and convenient way to make the journey down Long Island Sound. As evening fell, he made his way toward the city's wharf. He was seen walking alone, a distinguished elderly gentleman heading for the ferry landing, a route that would take him through a part of the city known for its rough-and-tumble character. This short walk, from the heart of the city to the water's edge, was the final journey of his life. He would never board the ferry to New York. As the evening deepened into night, the area around the Bridgeport ferry dock grew quiet. It was along a wooden walkway known as the West End Plank Walk, a path leading toward the passenger boats, that a discovery was made. Shortly before 9 p.m., passers-by found the body of a well-dressed man lying on the ground. It was Captain George Colvocoresses. He had been shot. The initial scene was one of shock and confusion. The immediate assumption of the local police and the citizens who gathered was clear and unequivocal. This decorated naval hero had been the victim of a violent crime. The theory that took hold with lightning speed was that the captain had been accosted by footpads, a common term for street robbers, as he made his way to the ferry. It was presumed they had attempted to rob him, and when he resisted, they had shot him and fled into the night. The news spread rapidly through Bridgeport and beyond. The murder of such a prominent and beloved public figure on a city street was a scandal. It was an affront to civil order, and the public outcry for justice was immediate and immense. The city was gripped by a singular narrative. A hero had been senselessly struck down by common criminals. In the days following the discovery, The theory of a robbery gone wrong solidified into the sole focus of the police investigation. The Bridgeport authorities were under enormous pressure to solve the crime and restore public confidence. They believed Captain Colvocoresses, a man of military bearing, would not have submitted meekly to a robbery. The narrative was that he fought back against his assailants, who then shot him in the ensuing struggle. Law enforcement began a citywide manhunt, concentrating their efforts on the city's known criminal element. They rounded up dozens of individuals with reputations for street crime, vagrancy, and violence. The press fanned the flames of public anger, publishing sensational stories about the lawlessness of the city's waterfront and demanding the swift capture and conviction of the captain's murderers. The entire investigation was predicated on the belief that this was a straightforward case of street crime. Every piece of information was interpreted through this lens. The police were not looking for a complex motive. They were looking for the thugs they believed were responsible for a brutal, opportunistic attack. The intense police dragnet soon zeroed in on a group of men who were part of a loose-knit group of criminals known as the Bridgeport Gang. From the many individuals questioned, investigators began to build a case against two brothers, Michael and Thomas Lino, and their associate, Owen McKenna. These men had criminal records and were known to frequent the area around the docks. The prosecution's case began to form around circumstantial evidence. An informant claimed to have seen the Lino brothers near the scene of the crime around the time it occurred. Another witness stated they saw two men struggling with an older gentleman. The police believed they had found their culprits. Michael and Thomas Lino were formally arrested and charged with the murder of Captain George Colvocoresses. The city breathed a collective sigh of relief, believing that the perpetrators of this heinous crime were now in custody. The stage was set for a trial that was expected to be a swift and certain path to conviction, delivering the justice that the public so vehemently demanded for their fallen hero. The narrative seemed complete, but troubling details were beginning to emerge that did not fit neatly into the story of a simple street robbery. As the prosecution prepared its case against the Lino brothers, key pieces of evidence from the crime scene began to cast doubt on the robbery-murder theory. The first and most significant contradiction was the state of the captain's body when it was found. While the police and public assumed robbery was the motive, Captain Colvocoresses had not been robbed. Tucked away in his pockets were his money, and, most notably, his valuable gold watch and chain. It was highly improbable that street thugs, having gone so far as to shoot a man, would then flee without taking such easily accessible and valuable items. This fact fundamentally undermined the prosecution's entire theory of the crime. Why would footpads murder a man but leave the loot behind? Furthermore, a more detailed examination of the scene revealed a lack of any significant signs of a struggle. The captain's clothing was not torn or disheveled in a way that would suggest a violent fight. The tidy state of his person seemed inconsistent with the desperate life-or-death battle that investigators had imagined. These inconsistencies were initially downplayed by the authorities, but they created an undercurrent of doubt that would soon grow stronger. The narrative of murder was dramatically challenged by a new and startling discovery. Some time after the initial investigation, a small, single-shot Derringer pistol was found in the grass near where the captain's body had lain. An examination showed that it had been recently fired. When this discovery was paired with a closer look at the captain's wound, the possibility of an entirely different scenario emerged. The bullet had entered his body through the right hip, traveled upwards and lodged near his heart. Medical experts began to question whether such a wound could have been inflicted by an assailant during a struggle. It was, however, entirely consistent with a self-inflicted wound, if the gun had been held against the body at a specific angle. This physical evidence prompted a deeper look into the captain's personal life. While publicly he was a respected hero, private inquiries revealed he was facing significant financial difficulties. Friends and family, when pressed, admitted that he had seemed more anxious and withdrawn in the weeks leading up to his death. His trip to Bridgeport had been about managing his troubled finances. The image of the unflappable hero began to be replaced by a portrait of an aging man struggling with debt and the fear of losing his standing. The theory of suicide, once unthinkable, was now a credible and compelling alternative. When Michael and Thomas Lino finally went to trial, their defense attorneys had a powerful new argument. They systematically dismantled the prosecution's robbery-murder theory, pointing to the inconvenient facts that the authorities had seemingly ignored. They highlighted that the captain's valuables were left untouched. They presented the discovery of the Derringer pistol as crucial evidence. They called medical experts who testified that the trajectory of the bullet was far more indicative of suicide than of homicide. The defense painted a plausible picture of a proud man, overwhelmed by financial ruin, who chose to end his life in a discreet manner, hoping to spare his family the shame associated with suicide in the 19th century. The prosecution, in contrast, was left with a weak, circumstantial case. Their key witnesses were unreliable, and they had no convincing explanation for why the supposed robbers had left the captain's watch and money behind. The jury was faced with two competing narratives. After deliberating, they returned with their verdict. Michael and Thomas Lino were found not guilty. They were acquitted of all charges and set free. The trial, which was expected to bring closure, had done the opposite. It had exonerated the accused, but had not officially solved the case. The acquittal of the Lino brothers left the death of Captain Colvocoresses in a state of official limbo. The court had rejected the murder theory, but the authorities in Bridgeport never formally reclassified the death as a suicide. For the public, this created an unresolved and deeply unsettling mystery. Two distinct and irreconcilable camps emerged. Many people, including the captain's own family, staunchly refused to believe he would have taken his own life. To them, suicide was an act of cowardice and despair, incompatible with the character of the brave naval officer they knew. They clung to the belief that he had been murdered and that his killers, whether they were the Lino brothers or someone else, had escaped justice. On the other side, many who had followed the trial were convinced by the evidence presented by the defense. They saw the financial troubles, the discovery of the pistol, and the peculiar nature of the wound as clear indicators of suicide. The press, which had once championed the murder theory, now printed lengthy articles debating the evidence, leaving the public to draw their own conclusions. The case remained officially an unsolved homicide, but unofficially, it was a profound and enduring question mark. In the end, the story of Captain George Colvocoresses' death is as complex as the story of his life. He remains a celebrated figure in naval history, a hero of the U.S. exploring expedition and the Civil War. Yet the final chapter of his life is shrouded in ambiguity. The official narrative of a hero murdered by criminals was publicly disproven in a court of law, but the alternative, a hero's private despair leading to a tragic end, was never formally accepted. No one was ever held accountable for his death, and the Lino brothers, though acquitted, lived with the stigma of the accusation for the rest of their lives. The case serves as a fascinating example of how public perception, personal honor, and forensic evidence can collide, leaving the truth buried somewhere in the space between a plausible theory and a provable fact. The mystery of what truly happened on that wooden walkway in Bridgeport in 1872 endures to this day. Thank you for spending this time with us. Reflecting on these past events is a way of remembering the individuals involved and the impact their stories had on their communities. If you have any thoughts on today's case, we invite you to share them respectfully in the comments below. We hope you will join us again for our next true crime case.